Good afternoon. Today is May 26, 2021. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Thank you very much for joining us today on The Pipeline. Today I'm joined to my right, back in Wild Rose country, is Dave Naylor, news editor of the Western Standard. Welcome back, Dave.
Thanks, Derek. Good to be here.
You always look better in person.
There you go.
And Cory Morgan, as always, crowd favorite, our columnist extraordinaire, and host of the Cory Morgan Show. How you doing, Cory?
Very good, thanks.
And coming to us from, I don't know, she might be too paranoid to let people know where they are. I don't know. We're not going to tell you where people. And we're not going to tell people where you're actually at. From an undisclosed location somewhere in Wild Rose country, Nadine Wellwood. How you doing, Nadine?
I'm doing great.
Well, first we want to begin by thanking all of our members for your generous support. We're very grateful. Again, we're just blown away by the huge increase in signups we've had week over week. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try it free for 15 days and see how Bill Free Media tastes. Today's show is sponsored by the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Don't forget that nobody works as hard as the CCFR to fight for your ability to use, own, and carry firearms. Check out what the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights is doing for you today by going to firearmsrights.ca and click Why Join Us. That's a fun sponsor. I like these guys. They're good. Okay, we're going to jump straight into today's show. We're actually holding today's show a little bit later than usual because we wanted to hear what Alberta Premier Jason Kenney had to say at his news conference on reopening Alberta, if we can call it that today. So let's just go straight to Dave Naylor. Dave, you've just unplugged your head from the computer listening to what he has to say. I think he's actually still speaking, but
I think he is still speaking, yes.
Not normally too much interesting at this point. You're not allowed to ask questions. They just take it from French CBC, things like that. Give us the brass tacks of the reopening plan.
Well, Jason Kenney said the end of this thing is near, and he announced a three-stage reopening plan for Alberta that a lot of people will be very happy to see. Starts on this Friday. Churches will be allowed to be open as of Friday to up to 15% of their fire code capacity. But things really start to kick into action next Tuesday. June 1st, outdoor activities will be allowed to have up to 10 people involved. Retail outlets can have 15% capacity. And hair salons and other personal services can open by appointment only. So I'm sure there's going to be a big lineup there on Tuesday morning trying to get in.
I think you should be first.
I should be first, yes.
After John Tory.
Good news for social people. They're going to reopen patios for having a beer, but it is going to be only limited to 4 people, down from 6 before the recent closures. And of course, those 4 people have to be from your household, or if you're single, your 2 best cohorts.
We all live together. So we can go to a beer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Dad, we can.
Okay.
And outdoor sports up to 10 people. Kenney announced they're going to do the reopening in stages linked to the number of people in the province vaccinated. So if we get, right now we're at 50% of the population and less than 800 in hospital. So we actually hit that total on May 18th. So they're going to put 2-week waiting period between all stage reopenings. So that puts us to the June 1st date. 2 weeks from now, if 60% of the population is vaccinated with at least 1 dose and there's less than 500 people in hospital, we move to stage 2. Stage 2 means you can go to the movie, you can go to the theater, and you can go to the library. If that doesn't suit you, you can go to your gym, as gyms will be reopening. Churches will be allowed 1/3 of their fire capacity, and restaurants can finally open for indoor service. They can have service for tables of 6. And the work from home order will be lifted at that point. Shouldn't affect us too much.
We've been working from home the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
Outdoor gatherings can have up to 20 people. And if we get to stage 3 in 2 weeks from there, which would be early July, as long as we have 70% of Albertans having a dose, stage 3 has no hospital requirements, but then it's all restrictions lifted. So Jason Kenney says he's looking forward to a Calgary Stampede and a Edmonton K-Days with full attendance, and CFL games in the province will be allowed to have full attendance. The only thing that really stays in is the mandatory isolation requirements. You will be required to isolate for 14 days if you get tested positive. So there's lots of other facts on weddings and funerals and whatnot.
Well, I'm mostly just excited for K-Days.
Yes, K-Days.
That's what Alberta's all about.
Exactly. So the basic story is online now, westernstandardonline.com. And as soon as we're done here, I'll be updating it with all the little facts and figures.
Excellent. Cory, this is actually, we've got something. Is it good enough?
Well, I mean, not good enough for me. It might be good enough for others, but it is finally something. I mean, something that's been lacking has been a plan. So at least we have a timeline. That's one of the things I think has always made it the most agonizing. Like last January, restaurants were acting up and people were having enough and they were pushing back. So we finally put out a plan. The question is, do we believe them? Because they're really prone to moving goalposts. So, I got a feeling it's going to matter more on what their internal polls say with the UCP than what the actual numbers say if they could decide to pick the next phase and the next phase. But either way, I'll maintain some optimism. It's seeing some light at the end of what's been an agonizingly long tunnel, and hopefully this crap just all ends soon.
Nadine, it's light at the end of the tunnel, as Cory said. The problem is we keep seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and Jason Kenney keeps on caving it in again. We're on again, we're off again, we're on again, we're off again. Depending on how you slice it, we're still in the third or fourth lockdown, depending on how you're defining a lockdown here. Although the CBC has said we've never had a lockdown, but they like to adamantly say that.
We never actually welded doors shut.
Yeah, we didn't shoot people for stepping onto their front lawn. Well, that was probably the next step, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's light at the end of the tunnel. But this has been on again, off again, over and over and over. But I mean, COVID does appear to be on its way out. Make sure you mute your devices, Nadine. It does appear to be on its way out. Vaccination rates in Alberta are actually relatively high now compared to Texas and Florida, which opened long before they had anything comparable to our vaccination rates, and they're fine. But with COVID actually appearing to be on the way out, assuming we don't have another crazy variant that isn't affected by vaccines or anything, based on current trends, it looks like we're on our way out. Do you think this plan is believable, or how concerned are you that they're going to move the goalposts again?
Well, I think this is really a result of public pressure. And I think the polls that we posted actually really clearly point to that. There is not a lot of support right now for lockdowns. And we are getting into summer season. And Albertans like their summer. It's short and they want to be outside and they want to enjoy it. So I think Kenney was under a lot of pressure to do this. One of the things I really found interesting was he talked a lot about the positive results of, say, Texas. Texas reopened back in March when they only had 14% of the population with a first dose. He has a condition of 50%, then 60%, and then 70% having a first dose. And Texas has had continual drops in numbers and astronomical, great results having opened up the doors. So I think the goalpost is set really high. There was a lot of what I perceived to be a lot of public pressure putting on people to get their vaccine. And I'm really curious because he says this is the reopen for summer, but he makes no mention of what happens again in flu season starts in the fall.
That is a big piece missed by a lot of the media. I mean, I think we should probably do something on this, is that COVID also went down this time last year because it's strongly correlated to flu season. I'm not a virologist, but we pay attention to what smart people say. And people on both sides of the general COVID debate do agree it is tied largely to flu season. When you would normally have a flu, you have a better chance of getting COVID. In fact, are we still at 0 flus in 2 years in Alberta?
As far as I know, yeah.
Well, it's a miracle. It's a miracle.
I think we've had one, just to clarify.
Well, one? No, I think you might be right. I did hear something about one flu. Okay, well, either way, we seem to have eradicated the flu miraculously. So, but this stuff is tied to it. I mean, COVID is not going to be gone by the fall and the winter next year. It's still going to be percolating out there. I think it will largely run its course. Please mute your systems. We've got to let it. It's going to run its course here, but it will come back up when we hit flu season again. So I think that's something definitely worth taking a look at. Well, and Nadine, you set us up for a good segue into polls. The Western Standard has commissioned Main Street Research, Keto Maggie, to do some real number crunching on what Albertans are feeling right now on a lot of topics. We're going to break it up piece by piece, not go through all of it at once. Let's start, even though there's a causal relationship, we'll get into the more of the causal stuff after. I think what we should do is start with the high level numbers just on where the parties stand. So we asked a lot of different questions, and we've been releasing them. We've actually got more to come, probably tomorrow. But in the series of questions, we went through where the parties stand. How would people vote if there was an election today? How do they approve or disapprove of the Kenney government's handling of COVID? And if they disapprove, why do they disapprove? That's a key question that the mainstream media tend not to ask with very much enthusiasm. So we're going to go through these. Let's start with the Alberta numbers. It's not necessarily good news for the NDP or the UCP. The NDP in these numbers were not as high as other polls have shown them. But the UCP is still well back of the NDP, but with a definite emergence of a third party in Wild Rose coming on. Dave, why don't you walk us through the provincial horse race numbers?
Yeah, holy numbers, Batman. Provincial race, according to the Main Street Research, 35% would vote for the NDP party, 28% would vote for the UCP, and 16% for the Wild Rose. Now, I think that's probably the highest rate that they've ever polled at, Derek, which I think shows a lot of support that has been traditionally UCP has gone to the right and the Wild Rose Independence Party. But the numbers have been lower for the UCP. They've been down in the low 20s. So that's there's sort of good news and bad news for everybody in that part of the poll. Good news mainly for the Wild Rose, though.
Yeah, it definitely is the highest they've polled so far. We had Main Street Research poll again back in January, and they were around 9 or 10% then, which is definitely on the cusp of you're going to probably start to win at least 1 or 2 seats around that. 10% got the Liberals 5 seats in 2012. 8% got the NDP 4 seats in 2012. But those parties had been around a long time. They knew where to concentrate their resources to try and still get seats, even with a relatively small amount of the vote. But at 16, they're definitely in a position to start winning some. Cory, what do you think is driving these numbers? That the NDP is not, in these numbers, probably likely to win a majority government. Normally need minimum 38, normally 40% or more to win a majority government in an election. 35 doesn't do it. They would probably win the most seats, but they probably don't get to be government regardless. What do you think is driving the numbers between both the NDP and the Wild Rose?
Yeah, well, the NDP is going to stay flat. There's only so many Albertans who embrace, the progressive policies that they offer. I mean, they're frustrated with the UCP. There's people holding their noses, perhaps, and still supporting the UCP, but the NDP, that's that base they're going to have, and it's going to fluctuate here and there by a few points. So what's really worth watching is what's happening on the right side, where the majority of Albertans are. And the UCP has been a disappointment. I mean, we've covered that a lot. You know, when it came to standing up to Ottawa, it's almost universal. People realize that Kenney's been extremely weak on that, which is a very strong area, of course, for the Wildrose Independence Party to grab that support. Democratic reform, same thing. You know, a useless recall bill and things such as that. Paul Hinman, again, don't underestimate that guy. He knows where these pockets of support, these wedge issues are, and he's harvesting them. And you know, the UCP is got to figure out who they are and where they're going, or they're going to really just see more of this bleeding.
And it's not just us predicting the Wildrose will win seats. Even the pollster, Keto Maggie, said they're in a position to take several of the rural seats.
Yeah. Nadine, it's obviously an extraordinary poll. Alberta's been very much a two-party system since the April 2019 election that saw only two parties return to the Alberta legislature. Alberta's traditionally had one really big party in the legislature. We've never had a minority government before. It's normally got a medium opposition party at most, and then, you know, a smattering of very small, sometimes 1, 2, or 3 seat caucuses from smaller parties. This was very much not in keeping with at least most of Alberta history with a strict two-party system. The poll we're seeing now shows that, at least if an election were held today, things could very well change in 2 years. Maybe Jason Kenney turns it around and everybody's happy again. Wildrose disappears. But do you think we're, in your view, how stable is this? Are we headed towards a multi-party system in Alberta again, as we traditionally have been, or do you think this is just kind of a flash in the pan of temporary anger?
No, I think we are definitely headed for a multi-party system. The UCP, it's, you know, I agree with Cory. The NDP is not going to go much higher. It kind of caps itself out for, you know, on its policies, and it's progressive, and it's moves to the left. And the UCP has just continued to move further to the left. I mean, Jason Kenney came out with such strong language on what he was going to do for Alberta and challenging Ottawa. And he has been a very big disappointment for those who just came out gung-ho and fully supported him. And he's losing that support. So it's not so much that we've got, you know, the right and the left. The UCP is leaving people behind, and they are omitting the Wildrose, who are truly, you know, the more conservative of the UCP voters. And, you know, I think they're here to stay. I don't think they're going anywhere. And I think that's good news for Alberta, because if you think about it, you know, Wildrose tends to be a lot of rural area residents as well. And there is a real difference that's between urban and rural. And this gives the rural districts, I think, a much stronger position in government to have an influence and a say in what happens in this province.
All right, well, I want to talk about what's driving these numbers. We've been trying to dance around it to not step on our own toes here. But Dave, why don't you walk us through some of these numbers here? We'll start with Albertans' opinions on lockdowns and continued restrictions. How, you know, where are they? I know the media say, well, the vast majority of Albertans, Kenney says, the overwhelming majority of Albertans support our common sense measures. We know you don't like it, but they support what we're doing. Only a tiny fringe oppose it. So let's talk about how many. We won't get into why people are opposing it yet. We're going to save that for the next section here. But let's get into are people supportive of lockdowns right now?
If I could comment on that quickly, because I think Kenney confuses compliance with acceptance.
Okay, well, let's just go through the numbers first, and then we're going to discuss them.
Hold your horses, Nadine. Hold your horses. No, Derek, is the quick answer. Not all Albertans support lockdowns. In fact, it's almost 50-50 split. Our poll shows 52% support the lockdowns, while 45% are against. Obviously, a couple of people didn't have an answer. But yeah, the province is split, mainly along party lines, I would think, too. Most UCP voters are against it, while the overwhelming number of NDP voters are for it. Also a split in probably a little bit of a split in the rural areas to cities, but surprising numbers all around.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll break it down a bit more here. First off, 52% of Albertans saying they support the lockdowns and continued restrictions. 45 against. The big difference, and you can see this on the screen here, is the intensity difference between the two sides. So 52% say they support continued lockdowns, but only 11% are the hardcore pro-lockdown. I call them the super Karens. They're the one. So that's 11% who said that we should remain locked down with all the restrictions in place until absolutely every single last person in Alberta is vaccinated. Not something that's even technically possible. That number is down significantly from when we pulled it just a few months ago. You can see kind of the intensity differences there. So on the left side, you're going to see January when we pulled it. So the hardcore Karens, they're about the same, 9 up a little bit to 11. But the moderate lockdown people, if we can call them that, they're down from 48% to 41%. On the other side, though, people opposed to the lockdown, it was only 39% opposed in January, and 12% of the total were people who said, and absolutely everything immediately, right now, no restrictions whatsoever. Those are the hardcore anti-lockdown side. That hardcore anti-lockdown side has more than doubled from 12 to 25%. So added together with 20, that's up to 45. That's a significant increase in the number of Albertans who say they're opposed to the lockdown over just a few months ago in January. But there's a few other ways we can slice this too, by party. So you'll see here we've got support or opposition to lockdowns broken out by people who say they're voting for different parties. Unsurprisingly, 85% of NDP supporters say they support lockdowns, just 12% opposed. Unsurprisingly, again, actually, I'm surprised. There are 12% of Wild Rose voters who say they support lockdowns. Their voters are actually the most uniform of any of the parties. Nadine, you got to make sure you shut off your sounds. But they had 88% opposed among Wild Rose voters. Now, UCP voters were a bit more divided. You see 40% supporting lockdowns, 55% opposed. So a clear majority of UCP voters are opposed, but they have a significant minority in favor. But it should be kept in mind here, if you look at how people voted last time, then UCP voters in that group voting last time as compared to people who are still with the UCP, they're even more overwhelmingly against lockdowns. And so Keto Maggie says that's a key factor in driving support away from the UCP toward Wild Rose. They're bleeding support from both sides towards the NDP, who want harder lockdowns, and towards Wild Rose, which want to end them. And unsurprisingly, we can add regional dimensions into this. Edmonton, broadly, I'm sorry, there is a good brave minority of you there, 34% opposed in Edmonton, but 64% in Edmonton supportive of lockdowns. Calgary, a little more balanced, 59% in support of lockdowns, 38% opposed. And I hate the way pollsters do this. This is not my language, just rest of Alberta. I think it's condescending. I don't like the terminology, but I suppose it's the most correct way to come up with it. That's just everything outside the two big cities. 59% opposed to lockdowns and just 38% in support. So I think the big takeaway from this is that Albertans are extremely divided over the issue. Slim majority still in favor, but most seem opposed. NDP supporters loving lockdowns, lock us down long, lock us down hard. Wild Rose voters absolutely hate this stuff. They think it's terrible. It should end immediately. And UCP voters, most but not all, think it's time to end the lockdown as well. You've got huge divisions between urban and rural. and it's clearly driving political support to that earlier poll we saw. Nadine, I know you're chomping at the bit. What's your take on how this is breaking down across parties and across region?
Well, again, I think you see a real differentiator between rural and urban. Let's take Edmonton, for example, just out of that equation, and you've got an overwhelming majority of Albertans that do not support lockdowns. And, let's take a look at Jason Kenney and his...
I didn't know we could just take Edmonton out of the equation. I didn't know that option was on the test.
Wishful thinking, I guess, for some people. And the key here is let's take a look at Jason Kenney's base. He keeps claiming that his base supports the lockdowns, but is that really what his base is saying? It's not. And he has to take a good hard look and realize that that is indeed not the case. And so is he trying to appeal to the NDP voter? Who's running the show here? That's the question I want to know right now. The people who voted him in don't support these lockdowns. And here we, just coming out of some of the harshest lockdowns we've seen in the country.
Cory, how dangerous is this politically for Kenney and the UCP? On any issue, if Albertans are roughly split 50-50, you could pick one of them. The problem is most of the people supporting lockdowns, they're overwhelmingly NDP. The NDP supporters seem to love this. His former base, which is now increasingly pushing Wild Rose, they hate it with the fire of 1,000 suns. His own remaining voters, of which he's only got 48% in this poll. He's got about 48% of people who voted UCP last time. So slightly less than half of people who voted UCP still say they're there. But even among those remaining UCP voters, a clear majority oppose lockdown, say it should end immediately. How dangerous is this politically for the Premier?
Well, very if he keeps up the current course. Those patterns with the NDP, there's a couple of reasons for that. 85% support continued lockdowns. Now, I bet you 85% of those NDP supporters have guaranteed income with union jobs. This has been a year-long vacation for them. They've been sitting at home. They haven't missed a mortgage payment. They haven't sweated their pensions. They aren't worrying about losing their houses, their vehicles, their savings. So they're okay with it. They're perfectly fine with it. The other thing is the mentality of progressive people is that government can and will solve everything. The solution to everything is government. And if it's not good enough, get more government. Now, Kenney trying to court those people is pissing in the wind. There's no point. They're not going to support him. So look, if you're looking just on the cold political reality wise, he needs to look at the people. You saw how it changed from people being virulently opposed to the lockdowns and how that's grown from 9 to 25%, I believe. That is probably people now who were hitting the end of their business rope. They were hurting before. Now they're on the brink of bankruptcy. That's why it's gotten that much stronger. We have to open up now. So if these people go broke, these people get hurt like this, they are never coming back to the UCP under Kenney. They won't be able to stomach it. They're losing houses, they're losing businesses, they're losing life savings. So he's got to figure out where his support is. As kind of Nadine was saying, find his base and bloody well cater to it. Quit trying to win the NDP. You're never going to do it. Never.
Well, okay. So this is the perfect way to move on to our next one. Is he at least trying to... Kenney is not a dummy. He understands you can't... the people on screen can't see, but someone of our staff in the back just scratched his head and looked at me curiously when I said that. But I do not believe he's a dummy. At least he hasn't. No, well, at least he's always been a smart political operator until fairly recently, and it's been difficult to try and explain and rationalize what he's doing. Even if you didn't agree with it, you could at least see where he was going with things in his head. So the big thing is, if you can't win over everybody, at least make sure the people you need to win over, your voters or your potential voters, are on side. That's not really happening. So we're going to bring up our next poll here. We had Main Street Research ask Albertans. Let me just actually back up for a second. I saw one comment say, I wasn't polled. This isn't an election. This is not a referendum. We are not polling every single person, because that would take roughly $10 million to do for a single question. It's a little outside the Western Standards budget.
Someone wants to donate, we'll do it.
I mean, if someone sends us $10 million check, we'll hold a referendum on whatever question you want. It'll be fun. No, but this is a scientifically conducted poll. This is not, when the Western Standard or CTV, the Calgary Herald puts something up and says, click here. Those are not scientific polls. Those are just kind of for fun and for interest. This is, you poll Albertans, you spread it out regionally, and you weight it. You weight it by sex. You weight it by age. You weight it by geography to try and get a scientific sampling of the population. They can sometimes be wrong, but more often than not, they're quite right, as long as you're asking good, fair, upfront questions. All of the methodology is on the Western Standards website right now. You can check it out for yourself, download it, see the methodology, see the actual raw data, check it out for yourself. It's pretty solid stuff. We don't always like the answers we get. I mean, 52% of Albertans still support lockdowns. I'd like to see that number a hell of a lot lower. Doesn't mean I might not agree with the number, but I think it's a credible number. So let's just jump into the next here. We asked we had the pollster, Main Street Research, asked Albertans if they approved of the UCP government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. What you see in front here are the results. Actually, there is a slight error on that. That's our fault. You see 66% of Albertans disapproving. The approval actually is not 20. That segment of the soft approval of Kenney is 20%. The dark green you see, that's the hard approval. Do they strongly approve of Kenney? That's 9. So the total approval of the Kenney government's handling of COVID-19 is 29%. The total disapproval is 66%. And of course, there's some people who say other or don't have an answer. But a big part here is the intensity. Of the small number, just 29% that approve of the government's handling, just 9%, single digits, strongly approve of the government's handling. If you look at the disapprove, those who strongly disapprove, I don't actually have the number right here, but it is, I think, on its own about 45 to 50%. So the number of people who strongly disapprove is massively larger than the people who strongly approve of the government's handling. Dave, actually, that's kind of the part where you should have given. But why don't you flesh it out a bit more? What's driving that?
Well, I think it's several things, Derek, and I think it'll probably be the next slide that helps explain it. They're not the people are opposed by very different reasons. Some people are opposed because it's too harsh on the economy. Other people say it's not harsh enough. So there's a real dichotomy in why people are opposed or why people are for it. So, but we've long known that Jason Kenney's had the worst record of all the premiers for his handling of COVID. So we've known for a good long time that Albertans are very unhappy with the way things have been going. And this poll just hammers it home.
Nadine?
I'll have to get...
Nadine, I was chiding you for not muting your computer again. Dave, why don't you flesh out the numbers? This, what you see here, we asked a follow-up question that I've not seen any of the other media ask. They say, they ask, do you approve of the way your premier is handling COVID-19, stuff like that? And Albertans say, no, we don't. We're angry. We're pissed off. And the CBC and the others will turn around and say, see, it's because Jason Kenney, people are disapproving of Jason Kenney because he's not locking down hard enough. He cares too much about the economy, not enough about saving people's lives. And they just kind of leave it there. It's like, and there's this very small, tiny fringe over here that are angry because they're nuts and oppose lockdowns. Well, we wanted to ask people why they are upset. We had a follow-up question. So we asked people who said they approved. We asked why they approved. Most of them were just mostly UCP voters who said they found the right balance between the economy and health. The really interesting one was the follow-up question to those who said they disapprove. So, Dave, why don't you break down the numbers?
You know what, Derek? I'm going to leave it with you. You know more about it than I do, and you're on a roll.
Okay, well, if media doesn't work out, I'm going to go into polling. Because
well, you're a numbers nerd. You were geeked out about this the whole weekend.
Yeah, I do love this stuff.
You didn't leave your den the entire 3 days.
Yeah. Okay. So, of those who said they they disagreed with the government's handling. So this is number is going to break the CBC's hearts here. So this is a subset already. These are just people who say they disapprove of the government's handling of COVID-19. Only 36% say that the government focused too much on the economy and not enough on public health. That's essentially the NDP side of things. They're angry at Jason Kenney because he is not locked down hard enough. And then we had an almost equal number, 34 on the polar opposite side, that are upset and they disapprove of the government because Kenney has shut down businesses, outlawed regular activities, and violated civil liberties. Another 14% say they are upset with the government for not providing enough support for families and small businesses. I would kind of, I'd posit that those are the soft anti-lockdown folks. They're not as hardcore as the 34% I mentioned before that are angry about shutting everything down. There's another 14% that say the government didn't provide enough support for families and small businesses. And then a fairly sizable 16% who say other. And I'd be interested to know what that 16% other is. I think, as I've said before, when you have a significant number of people saying other or something else, it behooves a pollster to try and figure out what that is. But that would be in the next round of polling. We should try to discover what that is. Nadine, as we said, we're told all the time when people say they disapprove of the government's handling of this that they're only upset because Kenney hasn't locked us down hard enough. Do you think that these kinds of numbers are going to be recognized by the government? Do you think actually that numbers like this, that people are angry about these lockdowns, that's dominantly why they're disapproving of the government? Do you think that that is what's driving Kenney's kind of at least announcing some plan today?
Well, this actually, in my opinion, goes to the exact opposite. This is what's driving Kenney's numbers down all over the place. People are not supportive of the lockdowns because he's been too harsh, actually. That's what the data is.
No, sorry, my question was, though, because these numbers are showing people do not support lockdowns, tons of people disapprove of the government's handling of this because they're angry about lockdowns. Do you think numbers like this, because surely they're polling too, they've got unlimited tax dollars to spend on polling on these kinds of issues. Do you think that these kinds of polling numbers are what's driving the sort of go slow reopening announcement today, or do you think that's just completely independent of the polls here?
Oh, no, it certainly plays into it. They have to know, the polls have been dropping and, they have to know the narrative that they've been coming out with has been incorrect. I mean, the polls are proving that. So I think the about face today is about, oh, look at all the wonderful things we're doing. And yes, we're getting back to normal and, giving the power back to the people. I think it's definitely a direct result of what we're seeing from this polling data. They know it. We know it. They know it.
I think one of the commentators just had a good point, Derek, that Keto Maggie also brought up. We're only halfway through Jason Kenney's term. He's got 2 years to go to the next election. Well, hopefully he's right, and this COVID thing is going to be all gone by mid-July. Will 2 years from now people have not forgotten what he's done, but will they have forgiven him? And will all these polls turn around? People remember what the NDP was like. They decide, well, I'm not going to stick my vote with an independent-minded party. Okay, I'll give Jason one more chance. So these numbers are dismal for him, but they're not fatal.
Well, Cory, why don't you speak to that? His overall polling numbers are crap. We went through that at the top of the polling section here. We've seen the NDP lead, but not necessarily headed for majority government right now. The Wild Rose certainly eating their lunch. Rural Alberta, it's actually a three-way race. It could be anybody's guess how it goes there. But then we've kind of gone through some of the factors that are leading into this. Todd Lowen's letter when he resigned as caucus chair before Kenney booted him from caucus, he hardly even touched on COVID. He went through a lot of other things like weakness or perceived weakness in dealing with Ottawa, fair deal issues, balanced budgets, things like that. If we do have, as Kenney says, the best summer ever, and we get to enjoy a Calgary Stampede and things return to some kind of normalcy this summer, do you think these numbers are going to change, and will people more or less just kind of go back to the mothership?
Well, they can change. I mean, that 2 years is virtual eternity in politics. A whole lot can change in that period of time. But exactly as you said, there's the underlying issues. He's got to find out who he is and who he's catering to and who his base really is. And the cracks were already forming before COVID hit. I mean, he was kicking the can down the road on the Fair Deal panel. He was overspending. He was never even talking about democratic reform. Like, we were already getting impatient with what we elected him to do before COVID hit. And that's the base that's fleeing now. As you said, Todd Loewen didn't even mention COVID when it was initial letter. It was all of the other things. Those are what he's going to have to get together and find himself and recover that loss within 2 years. Can it be done? Sure, it can be. But will he? That's a whole separate question altogether. I don't know.
Nadine, any final thoughts from you?
I don't think he's going to do it. I think the best thing the UCP can do is find a new leader, somebody who can walk the talk. And I think Kenney has disappointed far too many Conservatives in this province. And it's not just COVID. I mean, it was happening long before COVID, like Cory pointed out. And, you've got just way too much here, I think, to recover from. And I'll note that Keto actually talks about the polls, and it's very unlikely when you see this kind of shift happen in the polls that it shifts back. So, from a polling standpoint, highly unlikely. And just from a personal standpoint, the lockdowns have been harsh. And I think people will remember how harsh Kenney has treated pastors, how harsh he has treated business people, those who have legitimate exemptions. I don't think people are going to forget this anytime soon.
All right. Keto Maggie did say that when you have a move like this, it's quite sticky. Historically in Alberta, the progressive Conservatives were able to recover from catastrophically unpopular premiers by dumping the premier. I mean, that's how you did it. Ed Stelmach got elected on a big, huge majority government, got unpopular, they whacked him. They were put in Alison Redford, and she gets in, wins a pretty decent-sized majority government. She gets unpopular, they whacked her. So they keep on turning them over. Don Getty, it happened with him too. Ralph Klein they whacked, but he wasn't unpopular. That was just, he kind of stayed too long.
Tired out. Yeah.
They kind of the party tired of him internally, but Don Getty was headed for defeat, and they whacked him. I'm watching too much Sopranos lately.
It sounds like a Sopranos.
Actually, I was just watching The Godfather. I watched 1 and 2 over the long weekend. So, you got to bear with me. That does seem to be the way that the old progressive Conservatives could rejuvenate themselves in the polls. Then they put Prentice in, and then, I think they had played every card by the time they put Prentice in. So, but that does seem to be the way to rejuvenate. It's a big question. Can they do it with J.C. Kenney there? Because I know a lot of people are saying leadership review or the caucus can dump him. If I'm wrong,
the time though is going to be soon, because probably by next month or probably by the mid of July, he won't have to take his marching orders from Dr. Dina Hinshaw anymore. He'll have to take his marching orders just from the cabinet, and we know where he is with his cabinet at the moment. So
yeah. No, I know a lot of viewers say it's time to dump him as leader and replace him as head of the UCP. But if I know him, he's not going anywhere, no matter what. No matter how bad the polls get for the party, I don't see him stepping down. If I don't know, I'll bet in a small group. I'll give you odds that he's not going anywhere. But my bet is he's going to lead the UCP into the next provincial election, and I'm not sure that that's a particularly good thing if you're a UCP MLA fighting for your seat against either the NDP or the Wild Rose right now. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up there. We want to thank all of our members for your generous support. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try it free for 15 days. The Western Standard refuses to accept a penny of the federal government's media bailout, and we're proud to be here as an independently Western-owned and Western-focused media outlet here for you guys. And don't forget that today's show is sponsored by the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Nobody fights harder for your firearms rights, other than maybe Cory, than the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. They're a fantastic organization. Go to firearmsrights.ca and click Why Join Us to find out more about why you should become a member and supporter of the CCFRA. Thank you all very much for joining me. Nadine, Dave, Cory, it's been a slice as usual. Stay safe. Have a good day.